Oh, now we're live.
Okay. What is going on? Happy Thursday, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Access Omaha. Today we have Justine Campbell with us back again. Thanks so much for coming on again, Justine. We really appreciate it. We are continuing our series and our conversation with Justine, diving deep, and we're going to continue doing that a little bit today. She's going to continue sharing with us and going through some things as well. So we're super excited to have her back on and to be here with you guys and dive right into things.
Yeah, absolutely. As always, you know, as we've been doing before, what's up, everybody? Hey, I just jumping right in. I'm not saying hi. How selfish of me. So what's up? Welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for joining us again. We are in part 3 of this series, and just loving every minute of it. And of course, we want to just give our address to everything and setting the expectation as we go through this podcast. So to be clear, Levi and I are going to head into this series as we have been, speaking on our opinions and sharing our own stories. We're not speaking on behalf of all white people. We're just two people that plan to be as transparent as possible. And the same goes for Justine. She's one black person who is and who will share her stories and personal opinions as they relate to the topics we'll be discussing, and does not represent all black people. So she is simply one of many, and that we are very grateful to have her join us again and have this ongoing discussion about how we can unite together and listen to, learn from, grow from, and love each other as we go through it, and just discuss some of, I think, a lot of the tough topics and questions that I think our society and country and a lot of people are asking. So, yeah, I just wanted to jump in. For those of you that don't know Justine, this is Justine Campbell. She is a good friend of ours, and me and her go back a little bit. We worked at Grace University together, and so it's a pleasure to be reunited on the podcast for this series.
You almost made me break out in a song for a minute.
I mean, hey, let's do it.
We'll
I'm down for it. But I also want to be clear too. Like we've already discussed this, so I feel like I'm okay coming on air and saying on air, whatever, live.
That's valid.
That's valid.
Yeah.
And basically just saying that this is an ongoing discussion. So just because our series may end, you know, coming up here, doesn't mean that you probably won't see Justine ever again. Like we're probably going to bring her back onto the podcast again and continue the dialogue and the discussion. So I know we've talked about even like once a quarter or something like that.
Yeah.
As events unfold in our nation.
Yeah, I mean, as God directs, right? Like as God opens those doors and we continue to dialogue. Maybe Justine gets really tired of having conversations with us and she's like, I'm over you guys. But we will go as long as she is comfortable coming on and being with us. And so without further ado, let's get into the discussion. So maybe we should give somebody some background. Yeah, let's recap.
Quick recap. So this is our third part of the series, guys, and last couple of weeks we have other episodes as well. Really encourage you to go listen or watch those, depending on the platform that you're using. Really good stuff. That'll give you a lot of basis for the conversation today. If you're just tuning in today, you're still going to get some good stuff out of it, so please stay with us. But yeah, to kind of recap a little bit. So last week we dealt a lot with the history of Omaha when it comes to race and division between race in Omaha. Historically speaking, some things that led into that. Prior to that, Justine had shared a lot of her past, where she's from, and her family's past and their history, some of the things that they have dealt with themselves, how she ended up into Omaha as well. So yeah, super
Shout
excited.
out Texas.
Oh yes, Texas, yes. She's from Texas.
From Texas. Gotta get that in there. Shout that out.
But yeah, from there, so yeah, I guess take it from there. And
yeah, so we've been letting Justine talk a lot about stuff and sharing some things with us, and now I don't know, I felt kind of led to kind of share what I've been kind of going through and thinking about, and obviously there's a new perspective, and it's not new from our perspective,
yes.
right? Like, you know, one of the things I've always said about Justine, and whenever I talk about you with like other people, I was having this discussion last night with some family friends, and I was just telling them, like, you were just a person at Grace where if I was having a bad day or something, like I would pop into your office and I'd be like, hey, can you pray for me? Or can you just, and it was like the prayer of a black woman, just like the power that comes out of that and the authority, and I was like, I love it. Like I couldn't get enough.
You needed an anointing every now and then.
That's right. That's right. I need an anointing every day. Let's be honest. Like when I think back to our times at Grace, like I think back to those times of just being that encouragement to one another, and you know, there's a proverb that says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one man
yes.
sharpens another," and
yes.
that's kind of what came to my mind when I thought about us and my time there at Grace. And so we had a lot of, you know, discussions. Like one thing that I love about you is it's always come back to Scripture and like the truth and the Word, and so there would be times where I would literally be having conversations with her, and I'd be sharing a frustration, or I'd be, and there were times where I hated it, but she would be like, well, Ryan, what does the Word of God say? You know, like, what would God want you to do in this situation? I'm like, no, I don't want to have that conversation right now. Like, I just want to vent. And she'd be like, okay, I'll let you vent, and then I'm going to speak into it. And then it was always like that hard truth that you're like, all right, give it to me, Justine.
But you walked away feeling better, right?
Exactly.
And
it's true.
being able to resolve the situation.
It's true, yes. So I always admired that and loved that about you, and it's interesting how this is kind of going to move into the topic that we are going to talk about today. But I think we've always, you know, for us that our faith is the foundation of our lives. We've always recognized that there's evil in the world, right? And so like regardless of what's going on, we know that that there's an evil out there, and you know, we know that the devil is deceptive, and he makes you believe lies. And my wife and I were even talking with our friends last night, and she's like, it's so weird because it just dawned on me that I should have already known this, and like I do know it, but just saying it out loud, she's like, nothing that the devil says is truth.
Because he's a liar.
Like, because he's a liar. But she's like, it's not half a truth or like half a lie or whatever. Like everything he says is a lie. And I was like, and she's like, I don't know, that was just like profound for me. But to like hear her say that out loud, it was like, yeah, like that's true. Like, but we believe the lie so many times, right?
And that's what he counts on. That we will believe the lie, that we will follow through with that lie, and respond according to that lie. And that's where we get all these feelings and emotions and everything from, because we're responding to the lie instead of speaking back a lie with truth.
Yeah. And that's kind of where, you know, I always have to go back to the truth, right? Like I always have to go back to that foundation. And so as all this stuff started unfolding, like even with George Floyd and the riots and all these things, like the first thing honestly that came to my mind, you know, besides the obvious, right? Of like, I'm disgusted, I don't know what to feel, like my gut, my stomach is hurting right now because of what I just witnessed. But my next initial thought was like, this is pure evil, you know? And like, there's the smirk on that guy's face. I was like, that is Satan at his best, like using, you know, this guy of just standing over another individual. I don't care if he was black, white, you know, Asian, whatever. Like it was just, wow, like just this, I don't know, like there was just a shock to me, you know, and that was the first thought where I was like, okay, like it's time to hit our knees again as a country and as a nation, and really pray that God would, you know, use this as a revival within our country, you know, and unite, you know, the people here, and I think it's started to do that. Like I truly believe that there's a spiritual revival happening right now, and I think there's a you know, I don't know why I'm going off on all this spiritual stuff right now, but it's going into what I'm trying to get to, okay? And but I just feel like this is an opportunity you know, like right now for a lot of us to say, okay, you know, for me and Levi, it was like, we have a platform. Like, let's use the platform. Like, let's use this to speak out and to bring someone like Justine in and have a dialogue and a discussion and, like, show people that, like, listen, we need to be better, and here's how we can be better, and here's how we can make a change, and here's how we can make sure that, you know, the MLK stuff and all those other things that started years before us begins to go into fruition and begins to start seeing that change. Like, I don't want it to just be the dream, right? Like, I want it to be something that the dream is being lived out, and we're not quite there yet, but we're moving in that direction. So obviously, as this is all going on, like, I came across this passage in Luke chapter 10, and it, you know, I'm sure a lot of us have heard the story, but you know, it's Jesus sitting down with you know, like a crowd of people, and a couple of those people, you know, happen to be teachers of the law and very wise, and they knew the scriptures and those things, and you know, that this guy sitting there with Jesus, you know, asked him the question, like, what do I have to do to win in this life? You know, like, what does it take to get eternal life? And, you know, Jesus kind of looks at him and he's like, well, what's written in the law? You know, because he knew this, and he's like, you know, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength, and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus responds, you know, you have answered correctly. And then he goes on to talk about the Good Samaritan, and we all know the story. You know, but then another question, you know, that kind of leads into that is, you know, he's like, well, who's my neighbor, right? You know, and I love how Jesus doesn't really, like, answer his question. He literally, like, answers, like, what should you do for your neighbor? You know, and then he tells this story of, like, the Good Samaritan. And for those of you that don't know, you know, there's a priest that he's sharing this story, and there's a guy that's on this road, and he gets robbed and beat up and almost basically left to die. And this priest walks by him, and, you know, he doesn't help the guy or whatever, and he continues to walk on, and then a Levite walks by him and doesn't help the guy, and then the third guy that finally comes, you know, picks this guy up, saddles him on his donkey, takes him to an inn, you know, bandages his wounds, talks to the innkeeper, says, hey, make sure that this guy doesn't die, basically, take care of him, and whatever that cost is for him to stay here until he gets better, I'll cover. And you know, I think by Jesus sharing that story, he's like, that's what it means to love your neighbor, right? And we can go deeper where we talk about, you know, the Samaritan and the relationship to, like, the priest and all this stuff, and why they didn't help him and some of those things, but I don't want to go there today. I want to focus on, as I was reading that story and thinking about what is happening today, I was like, not much has changed. Like, you know, as I'm reading that story, I'm like, wow, like, this is really hitting home for me, especially in the conversations that we've been having, because I think it relates a lot to what is happening, you know? And you know, we've talked about it in the previous episodes, you know, like Levi was talking about, like, I just think it's silly, you know, when you're talking about a bird's eye view or a larger view, an overhead view of this entire situation, right? And, like, it's silly that people are treated differently because of the color of their skin or their background or their culture or whatever it is, right? Like, it's crazy, but it also goes back to a lot of other things, right? Like the way they were raised, you know, like what they were taught, like all these different things. But at the end of the day, you know, I think for at least for me, as I look at all of this stuff, it's like it comes down to good and evil. You know, like there is an evil there and there is a good there, and it's like, you know, Satan has been put in charge to, like, rule over the earth, and so, like, there's gonna be evil, but how do we overcome that, you know? And so as I looked at that and how it ties into, like, what's happening today, you know, I think we all have a choice, right? Like, this guy that was walking by this person laying on the road in the story here in Luke, you know, in the Good Samaritan, like, he saw this guy that was almost dead, and no matter, I don't know where he was going. I don't know what was his agenda for the day. But as I thought about that too, I'm like, man, that's convicting, because like with me, you know, I get in arguments all the time with my, not arguments, I call them intense moments of fellowship.
Quickly you walk that one back.
Intense moments of fellowship, we like to call them. But, you know, sometimes I'll say, like, you have no idea, like, my schedule is, like, literally I book things every 30 minutes or an hour. So it's like, I know what I'm doing, like, the next 30 minutes or the next hour, like, and that's just my day. It just flows, and that's how I stay organized and go. And so, you know, I got convicted a little bit, because I'm like, what if somebody was there, like, would that deter you from, like, all these other things, and or would you sit there and help this guy, or would you be like, man, I've got to get to my next appointment, I got to go, like, and not worry about him, you know? And I think sometimes I'm like, man, okay, God, I'm listening. Like, I want to be that person that if that is a person that I should help, I don't want to get distracted by the chaos going on around us or in my mind, that I fail to hear the voice of God, or I fail to hear, you know, or see that situation, right? Like, I mean, I think sometimes our eyes can be blinded to, man, like, that was a guy that was in need of help, and I just drove right by him, or things like that. So I just felt a little bit convicted there, but I think what I got out of all that, and what I'm getting out of, you know, our dialogues and discussion is, you know, we can't ignore the problem that is happening, like, in our society, right? Like, in what's in front of us. But we can take action.
Yes.
Right? Like, what we're doing right now and having a podcast and a discussion with you is we're taking action. We're basically saying, okay, enough's enough. Like, let's have this discussion, and let's figure out, like, how we can all be better together. And there it is. Yep. No pun intended.
I saw it.
But really, like, how we can kind of take this and you know, and hopefully help other people have that dialogue that needs to be had. And I know we've all been sharing, like, videos of as we've been watching, you know, different pastors and different people, like, having conversations, and I'm like sending it to Justine, and I'm sending it to Levi, and I'm like, hey, what do you think about this one? You know, what do you think about these questions? Or like, and we've just been dialoguing back and forth.
And that's that learning together, you know, and hearing other people's perspective, or where they came from, or their story. And I know we're going to go further into here talking about this scripture, but Ryan and Levi, I was curious about, you know, your story. I mean, what the Good Samaritan in you, let's say that. Yeah. What triggered it? What triggered it? You know, not saying you wasn't a good person before, but when it comes to the issue of hate and racism, what is your first story? Or
I mean, I kind of shared this, and then I'll let Levi share his story too. Like, you know, like, I've shared this with you, you know, numerous times, and I think we were having this conversation with your daughter, and I was like, you know, I can remember being in class, like, in elementary school, like, and learning about slavery, you know, and I remember just sitting there in class, and, like, I felt this anger, like, boil up inside of me, as far as, like, this isn't right. This isn't fair that, like, you would treat someone like that, you know, and at such a young age, it was like, I recognized, like, hey, why were these people treated differently, you know, and then, you know, we mentioned Remember the Titans is, like, one of our favorite movies, you know, and Forrest Gump is another one of my favorite movies, and there's even some spots in Forrest Gump, you know, and stuff that goes on, but I think what's great about it is, you know, like, I always get made fun of because, like, I would watch some of those movies growing up and I'd cry, you know, like Forrest Gump and stuff, like, I'd cry.
You cry watching Forrest Gump. There's so many, like, tear-jerking moments in that movie. It's such a good movie.
I mean, you saying men cry?
I mean, yeah, men cry. But, I mean, the good men cry. You know,
yeah, I like that.
But yeah, I remember, like, you know, being exposed to some of those movies growing up, and to me, like, I got so much, like, power, or, like, I would say, like, maybe power is the wrong word, like, enjoyment or encouragement from like seeing those relationships develop, you know, despite their color, their backgrounds, you know, the cultures they came, like all that stuff. I've always been intrigued with like different cultures, you know. So like, there's a guy that lives across the street from us. His name's Raj. Shout out Raj if you're watching this. And he's from India, you know. And like, I remember the first time that he's the first like couple we met, like moving into our neighborhood. And he invited us over, and he's like, "Let me show you around. Let me show you my house." And he started making food on the grill one day, and he's like, "Come on over and try some of our food." And I was just like, I was amazed at how like hospitable they were, and just learning about his culture, right? Like, we sat down and we had conversations about like, well, Roz, what brought you, you know, to the United States, and is your family still in India, and like all that, and just learning about, you know, the different cultures and stuff there.
And that's the key. That's the key, you know, there, because I would say when, you know, you talked about meeting me or whatever, but I remember when we initially interacted, and the very first thing, and some people may not understand what I'm about to say, but the first thing I thought, and I even went back and talked with my mom, because I said a lot of things, mom or whatever, and I said, I don't think Ryan is from here. And she understood what I was saying, because I said something about him is different. And then my mom said he's probably been exposed, and I knew what she was talking about. You know, and so you could tell the difference. You know, those that have been around other cultures and experienced other cultures, it always feels different. It goes back to when I was telling you previously that whenever we was traveling and we go into a town and we're deciding whether or not we're going to stay in that town or go on to the next one, all I have to do is get out of the car and go in a couple of grocery stores or a gas station or whatever, and just those quick interactions. And it doesn't take long, especially when your whole life, you know, you feel that atmosphere or spirit or whatever you want to call it. We could tell, and then we will move on. But when I met you and we were talking, I didn't feel that sense of where you were uncomfortable in my presence. I mean, I was just another person, you know, to you. And going back, like when you're saying to show you, I understood what you're saying. I don't see color, so it wasn't that you didn't see my color. He was not deterred by my color. You know?
I think that's an important distinction too. Like, it's not that you're not recognizing that there is someone who's of a different cultural background. It's more that, you know, that is not something that's creating a prejudgment or a preconceived conception, or, you know, whatever, something like that. It's not something that's making you, I guess, draw any conclusions about who this person is and what their life might be and where they come from. And that's the biggest thing, because we all have our own stories, and each person has their own unique life struggle, like whether you're, you know, born in the United States or somewhere else, and you don't really fully know a person until you know and understand what that is and what they've gone through, and then you can truly love them for who they are and know where they've come from and what makes up, you know, who they are and why it makes up who they are.
And it also is a way, when you spend time with them, to begin to erase or wipe out any of the prejudices or biases or things that you have heard or seen or were told. And as you begin to build that relationship and you get more comfortable with one another, then you can begin to ask those questions that you wouldn't ask a person on the first meeting of them. It's almost like in your relationships. There are certain conversations that you don't have with your husband or wife. You know, you don't have those conversations or those intimate conversations in the beginning. But as you get to know one another and trust one another with each other, then you begin to reveal, you know, a little bit more, you know, about who you are. And then you say, I didn't know that about you. Or, you know, or you've met that person where you say, when I first met you, I thought you were, you know, but why did it change? Because you took the time to spend some time with them, to get to know them for themselves, and not based on what someone else has told you or what someone else has taught you. You know, and then you begin to, those fears can begin to come down, or being threatened by someone will begin to break down.
Well, and I think too, like, even going back to, you know, Remember the Titans I just remember that playing such a huge like moment in my life, like seeing that movie, because what took place in that movie that I saw was it did take, you know, some of the characters to say like, screw what my parents have taught me or what these other people have said. I'm going to treat this person the way they should be treated, you know. And you saw these two guys, you know, come together and make a huge impact and understand that it was, you know, they used football, right, as a way to unite. But like, you know, I loved how Denzel takes them to, you know, the cemetery, you know, he takes them on that trip, and you know, they go to Gettysburg, and you know, like when it's more than just football, like you're teaching them about life and you're teaching them again about history and different things, you know, you see that and you're like, all right, that's what I want to do. Like, I want to teach my kids. I want to be a part of a group of people that like share that same view. And if you're not sharing that same view, like, you can get behind me, you know, because it's like I don't want anything to do with that, because I believe that this is how you're going to unite and bring people together and really experience like the depth of like friendship and unity and community and things like that. And yeah, some of that I think goes to, you know, you could argue that goes back to like your faith and things like that, you know, of what it's supposed to be about. But yeah, I just, you know, that's kind of my background a little bit. You know, I will say, like, there's two more things that kind of come to mind, and one of my mentors in high school ended up adopting two boys from Haiti, you know, and coming back to Podunk, 4,000 people, Aurora, Nebraska, where there's not much diversity at all, you know, it's all white people, and then you bring these two black kids in, and it's like, okay, like, I still to this day think that, you know, he still, you know, is recognizing the struggles that some of the two boys go through. But, you know, you see the type of character that's been built within them because of the household that they've been raised in. And we call him the Haitian sensation, you know, because Mac is you know, he's going to probably get a scholarship to go play football somewhere, and is just a beast. And so be on the lookout for the Haitian sensation in the future. So if you guys ever see me post anything, you'll know who I'm talking about. But there was that, you know, growing up and watching and being a part of their family, growing up and just watching that, you know, that it wasn't a color, didn't matter to them, you know, but, you know, hearing the stories of when they went to Haiti and they went to get them, you know, like, you know, they went down there with the intention of getting one of the boys, and then they saw the brother, and they're like, well, we got to take him too, you know, like, and they brought him back, and, you know, and that's in of itself, I think, he probably didn't know at the time, like, what he was going to be getting into, and what, you know, but he was like, I feel called to bring these boys home, and I'm going to obey, and I'm going to do it, and so then there was that, and then there was, you know, as Vanessa and I moved to Omaha, like, we got involved in our church, and you know, we're heavily involved with, made a great relationship in the Dominican Republic, and you know, I'm connected with him and some of the people down there, and like just felt a huge calling to serve and be a part of what they're doing there. And again, like, I love, like, the Dominican is like the home away from home for me. Like, it's just, I don't know what it is, but it's like whenever I go back there, I've been there like 4 times now, like, I go back and it's just like, I love the people, I love serving there, like, I love building, you know, those relationships, and that's just me, you know, but like, yeah, it's not awkward, it's not like I don't speak fluent Spanish, but we find ways to like communicate, and we still, you know, find other things that tie us together to build that relationship, whether that's basketball or whatever. But I think God uses that to, you know, bring people together as well. Like, you know, there's barriers there, like language barriers and things like that, but I think if you're open and you're willing to listen and to go and to learn, like, you start to see how God uses that to, like, you know, bring a group of people together. And so anyways, that's kind of my background, but I'll let Levi kind of speak into his background and kind of share that a little bit as we continue to move forward there.
Thanks, man. Thanks. I don't know if there's I don't think there's a moment. You know, like I don't think there's nothing I can search my mind for. You know, that was the thing. You know, I talked about a little bit of this in our last episode, but I think for me, I've just had a pretty diverse life altogether, and I definitely credit a lot of that to my awesome parents. Shout out Dad, Jim and Renita. You know, and they're strange. My parents, Ryan can tell you, I love you guys, but be real. They're odd. They're an odd bunch. You know, when I was growing up, we had, my folks didn't have a lot of money, and I was the youngest of four. And as I got older and they grew in their careers and things like that, they started to get a little bit more comfortable and things like that. But when I was younger, and certainly when my other siblings were around a lot more than me, they had a lot of struggles and stuff. But my folks were always really connected with their church, and we were always Christian, non-denominational, and you know, one of the things I think was really cool about them that I know has definitely played into a part of who I am today, because Rachel gives me a hard time for it all the time, but like they, you know, as my folks grew in their careers and stuff, my dad was always a really handy guy. Some of that he also passed on to me, which I appreciate. You know, but they get a little bit more money and they build onto our house over here, or he'd build a part over there, and then, you know, pretty soon we had this huge house, and everybody's like, oh, Walker's rich and stuff, and it's like, not really. My dad was just building all this on his own, years and years and years, you know, and but with that, because we did have this big house, and you know, my older brother and older sister were much older than me, so they would move out, graduate, and kind of go on their lives and stuff, and then we'd have this big empty house. So what my folks would do a lot of is they would take in international students, they take in a lot of missionaries who were getting ready to go on their trips. You know, there are situations where we had a few different families who had sold their home and then moved in with us to, you know, live 6 months or a year to plan to go on their mission trip and stuff and save money and things like that. Or as they were raising money and stuff. So we always had kind of a revolving door at our house, and you know, my folks have hosted international students from Japan, Togo, I mean, like you name a place, a continent, and we've had some in our house from there. So
Antarctica?
No, apparently people actually live there. So, but you know, I think that's part of it too. And you know, living out of Nebraska, I lived in San Diego for 10 years. I think that certainly plays a role in just. There's a saying, like, you know, your mind is like a parachute, it only works when it's open. I think that is very true in a lot of aspects. You should always hold true to yourself and your beliefs and morals, ethics, things like that. But I really think that that's true. I mean, you have to be open-minded. You have to hear other people's perspectives, and again, knowing someone, once you get to know their heart and who they are, it washes away any preconceptions, any prejudices, or anything like that. Because anytime there's a doubt about that, you can come back to why I know who they are. You know, so it makes it a more of a defensible situation for you to not second guess their character, because you know that person's heart all the time. You know, we all make mistakes, and we're all sinners, and we're all going to fall short, right? But in those moments, it allows you to go, I know who that person is. So yeah, I don't have any moments. I don't want to be like, oh, I've never had any prejudices against anyone my whole life. But yeah, I can't think of any one specific moments. I just think I was really blessed with good parents, and I had kind of a strange upbringing with you know, Christian school, and then being homeschooled, and then all the traveling and different things that I've done, and my own personal struggles in my life, which I've had a lot of. I think that too makes you learn. You know, it makes you get thick skin and look at situations differently, and look at people's works and actions a lot more than what they say, because really, when the rubber hits the road, that's all that matters, you know.
And I think what both of you have said is what, you know, I still hold to, and it's that if you have that exposure to diversity, you know, and I think that's why, you know, then, you know, segregation was a hard thing, because it didn't give that opportunity for one side to get to know the other.
Yeah.
You know, and even like they say today, you know, still say the most segregated hour is on Sunday, you know, at church. But you've seen over the years, you know, some of that is changing. Now, is that to say, you know, on Sunday being in an all-black church or all-black white or all Hispanic church is bad? No, because it's still your social or where your interaction area. But if that is all you know, is just that little bubble that you're in, it is harder to get to know other people, and it does make it easier to hear that lie, you know. And then when you hear that lie and you hear it enough, or other people describing someone that you never got an opportunity to know for yourself, especially if those persons are authority figures, you know, that you should look up to, especially as a child, look up to and trust, you know, that what they're saying is true, you know, then that's going to be there. But somewhere along the line, you'll manage to see children that grew up from those type of households, but they get exposed through some other way, and they begin to make up their own mind and say, well, no, it's not, you know, quite like that, and they venture out. That's where some hope come in, you know, and then bringing in, obviously, you know, God, because I don't think any of the unity can truly happen the way it's intended without him, because he's the great unifier. He can bring us together, and when there's disagreement or misunderstanding, you know, having him in the midst, you know, of those situations, like I pray that he will be in the midst of a lot of the conversations that are taking place and will take place. But even if it's not, because not all groups that are going to be discussing the things in our world are from a Christian background, you know, but still, even in that, you know, I believe God is looking over every, you know, group, and he can be that center, you know, of grounding everyone, so that you can have that sense of, we want to make a difference, or we want to see change. And even like this this Samaritan, you know, that you brought out, Ryan, you know, they knew that there was an issue with, you know, Jews and, you know, Samaritans. You know, this is straight out of racism and hate. You can see it, you know, so it's a perfect parable to bring in, because this is where we live right now. The only difference is this Samaritan, you know, despite, you know, him saying, and I don't know who the person was on the side of the road, and, you know, and it was left out, because I believe it's irrelevant. It was a person. It was a human being. It didn't matter who he was, whether or not it was one that looked like him or not looked like him. There was a person on the side of the road that needed help. You know, and so this man took time out of his, wherever he was going, because obviously he had somewhere to go. We will see later, you know, he has to leave him at the end, but he sacrificed. He was willing to sacrifice his time. He was willing to sacrifice his resources, you know, to do whatever he needed to do in order to ensure that another human being is taken care of, and willing to say, not only that, you know, but if it costs more than what I've left you, which that took 2 denarii or whatever, it's like a whole day's wages. So that was a lot, you know, to sacrifice to a stranger, someone you don't know. And I think some of that is what we're starting to see now, that the good Samaritan, the sleeping giants or whatever, are waking up or rising up. And if it took the incident that happened with George Floyd to finally cause some to open their eyes for the very first time, you know, which is hard to believe in our country, but some are. They're willing to be transparent and admit, I opened my eyes for the first time then. So those that are opening their eyes for the first time, I don't want them to feel any shame and condemnation. You know, you're open, your eyes are open. And so don't let the enemy come in and try to shame you on, what do you mean? Even though I know earlier I said, what do you mean you just now? Because that was a shock to me, you know, when you're living it every day. But now they're joining the ranks of those that had eyes open back during Dr. Martin Luther King's Jr.'s time. And they have joined the ranks of those whose eyes were wide open, and they were willing to be that good Samaritan, sacrifice their lives, you know, knowing that if we get on this bus, or if we do this shut-in with you, you know, we are in the same boat as you. but they counted not their own life as anything. You know, they was willing to make that sacrifice for a greater change. And then when you see how long it takes for change to come about, you have to be willing to stay in there and not say, oh, I thought this was going to be over when the riots were over. Or I thought this was going to be over when, you know, when this, that, and the other happened. You know, no, again, it did not get this way overnight. That's 400 plus years, and even longer if you just look at history in totality. That's a long time for something to just be resolved and changed overnight. Would it feel nice if we could just go to bed and wake up the next day and say, all of it is fixed and we can just go on with our lives? But it's going to take some sitting at the table, disagreeing, not understanding, getting angry, you know, trying to figure out why you're so angry, I just said, but what you said was, you know, insensitive. Well, how was it insensitive? In teaching one another. It's going to be, you know, a struggle. So have we counted up the cost? And I remember asking Ryan that question before we came on the podcast, because I know your excitement. I knew you and I had talked about the stories or whatever, but I also knew that big picture out there. So in your zeal, I wanted to make sure, Ryan, you know, have you counted up the costs, you know, for this podcast? And he quickly excited, you know, yes, I counted up the cost. And I asked the question again, you know, and slowly, Ryan, have you counted up the costs? And so I think it sunk in a little bit, but his answer was still yes. You know, and so that's where I see that where this Samaritan, you know, was willing to count up that cost, even knowing that he was in a dangerous environment, and whoever had done this to this man could still be out there. But I'm not leaving him this way, and I'm going to take him wherever I need to take him and care for him as long as I can, and then when I have to leave, make sure the resources are available, the medical attention, the housing, you know.
That's the key part too, because it's like, it's not, like, it's so far above and beyond, like, because I think a lot of times that you see stuff happen here, you know, it's like, would I do that to somebody today? Like, that's a hard question to answer. Like, would I take somebody in? Like, I think there's times where it's easy to say, like, well, yeah, I'd help them. Okay, yeah, I know you'd help them, but like, would you get them to the hotel and drop them off and be like, hey, it's on me tonight, have a good one? Or would you literally say, like, hey, by the way, here's some food, here's some money, here's some other things to help you get back on your feet, here's, like, you start adding up all the other things, and it's like, I don't know, like, and I think obviously every situation is different, right? But I think, you know, it's a hard question to answer if we're being real with ourselves, to be like, would I go to that extent of what this guy did? You know, like, because it wasn't just, hey, I'm picking up this guy off the street and getting him some help and dropping him off at the hospital and saying, okay, my job is done, see you later. It was like, there was more to it than that, you know, and it'd be like dropping somebody off at the hospital, introducing them to one of your favorite doctors, paying his hospital bill, making sure that he's being taken care of 24/7 and you're checking in on that. And then after he's done, being like, all right, what can I help you do next? You know, like, I don't know if there's a lot of people that would do that. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying in the context of that story, I'm like, man, that guy went above and beyond. You know, and I think it's interesting because, again, Jesus didn't answer that question of like, well, who's your neighbor? Like, he answered the question with his question with well, this is what you should do for your neighbor. And I think in telling that story tells you
the answer.
Who your neighbor is like, it's anyone. You know, it's not just somebody that you get along with or somebody that's easy to carry on a conversation with. Like, that could be your enemy. That could be your boss that you don't get along with or that you don't respect or whatever. Like, that's a tough situation to be in if you think about, like, we all know those people, right? Like, we all have those people in our lives where we're like, man, if I saw him on the road, I'd be like, he probably deserves it. Like, you know, like that first thought, it wouldn't be like, no, I should go help him. Like, whew, it would take a lot to
Yeah.
Humility.
That's kind of like, you know, you bring that up and now to turn that corner back to us. We haven't forgotten about the topic that we're on.
Absolutely.
But that's where some have gone when they may have heard some of the alleged backgrounds of George Floyd. And in my mind, you know, it's like, but what does that have to do with, let's say he did steal some bubble gum or whatever it was. I'm not saying it's simple, I don't know the allegations, so I'm just saying something. Does that warrant, you know, his life being snuffed out of him? Does that warrant it? So it's irrelevant, just like I felt like the Samaritan man, it's irrelevant who this person is on the side of the road. You know, right is right and wrong is wrong. And it doesn't make it be okay just because you may hear that someone has sins, you know, in their lives, or someone is making sure that they bring out all of those faults, because you may want to feel like you want to justify, you know, the action, because surely this person didn't just do it, you know, out of spite and hate, you know, and surely, you know, this man must have done something to deserve it, you know. But who in your right mind, if that was your son or your daughter, even if they were guilty of an act, would you say they deserved it? My son deserved that. My daughter deserved that.
Absolutely.
I don't think no one in their right mind would say that.
No, and I think that's a good point that you bring up, because it's really, you know, we were talking about this a little bit off before the episode and stuff, about how things that have come up when Brandon was asking the question about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And yeah, I mean, everybody has stuff in their past. Everybody has things that, you know, that all of us, you know, injustices or whatever, things that we're all guilty of, sins, whatever they might be. And what's important in this particular instance that we're talking about is the action, right? And it doesn't really matter all the things that happened before, all those prejudgments or whatever they might be, because the reality is, regardless of what that was, it doesn't warrant what actually took place. And no, I mean, I think that's it's a good spot for me to, you know, ask kind of a tough question too, that we've referenced a couple times and talked about a couple times, but you know, you hear a lot of people these days, they're referencing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., they're talking about MLK and referencing back this time, which was, what, 60 years ago? I mean, and it's exactly. So it's funny to think about, hey, you know, I don't want to laugh because it's not but what I think is mind-boggling is that it's 2020, and here we are talking about something that took place, you know, over 60 years ago that really hasn't changed much ultimately. I mean, that's what it boils down to. We're talking about, you know, there's memes and folks online and things like that who are talking about, wow, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream, but that's all it was a dream. And I think hearing that it's really like disheartening, you know, to think about. And it's one of those things that, like, we all walk around in our lives and it just passes by. It's a fleeting thing or whatever, but it's like we were talking about before. Sometimes when you just say things, when you speak them into reality a little bit, and then you have a chance to let your own conscience just absorb it, then you're kind of like, whoa, whoa, that is like really, like, to think about that. So, I mean, I guess speak about that a little bit. Why do you think people are bringing that up so much right now? Obviously, a lot of what's going on, but I guess talk about your feelings about that a little bit, and why you think there hasn't been a lot of movement, or why we lost a lot of potential progress, you know, from that time until now, and how that still plays a role in today's world.
Well, I know that you mentioned, and I had read when you sent me the questions about why do some black people say, you know, well, it's just a dream, you know, or it's still a dream, or why do we feel this way, you know, it's just a dream. And it reminds me of, like, when we talked about earlier, if we were to take a microscope or one of those telescopes, and if you just span in and have it zoomed in, you can see those pockets of, but it's nice here in this pocket, or it's nice here in this area. But when you take it and you span out, and you look at the broad picture, you know, then maybe it doesn't, you know, look that way. And it goes back to when I'm saying that, you know, maybe some of, you know, my friends or my daughter's friends saying, my first time of recognizing it was with George Floyd. Then you can understand a little bit more the question of, you know, is this going to be that same type thing where, okay, it's just a dream, you know, because we haven't seen the difference. But when you believe that things are not exactly the same in the sense of where they're not doing, you know, slavery anymore. You're not in slavery anymore. You can work wherever you want to work, or you can, you know, or whatever. So those are those things where you took the scope all the way in, and that's what you see. But when you pan out and you look at the things, no, those blatant things, like I was telling you before, those blatant things, they may not happen, and sadly, they're starting to happen. You know, some of the blatant things are happening, but that's that test to see what is justice going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, now that it's occurring, it's going to be again something else that's swept under the rug. While, you know, to fit under there with all the other elephants that have been swept under there, and so you feel that. And so I think the answer to just blankly say why are we, you know, we're saying why black people say it's just a dream. It's not where you can just put an answer on it just that easy, because you have regions, you know, and you have cities and you have states, and the situations or the circumstances in all of those different places is different, you know. So it may look like that his dream is more realized in one city, and then you can drive 30 miles away and it is not realized in that particular city, you know. Or I can drive across country, you know, that same way. When I tell you I can go in the store and I just walk from one around the store, the whole vicinity of the store, and come back out, and I know in that quick of a time, do we stay or do we go? You know, so that is, you know, the reason that you say, you know, the dream. And then the answer is also, as we said earlier, it's spiritual. We don't want to think it is, you know, but we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. The enemy has caused us to wrestle against one another and think we're each other's enemy, but we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. But that is spiritual wickedness and rulers and the darkness and power and principalities and all those things. That's who our real enemies are. But it goes back to that deceiver, you know, and being deceived in our mind. And if we're deceived in our mind, then we can become the vessel for the adversary to use us as pawns and manipulate us on the board as hate pawns, and we can hate one another, and then this world that God loves so much, it'll stay wicked and evil, and, you know, I win, you know. And so when we don't realize who we are and whose we are, you know, then it is difficult for us to be who we've been called to be, and that's one people. You know, that's how he created us, one people, but we allow the enemy to come in and speak into our mind, and now there's division. And the other thing I would say is, you know, but that's spiritual. So again, remember I say everybody's not in the same spiritual place, everybody's not Christian. So I'm going to answer it a little bit from that natural standpoint, and I would say from the natural mind, I'll say we don't know if the Good Samaritan will grow weary of doing well.
Oh, yeah, wow.
We don't know, because, like I said, it's going to take some time, you know, but I can already feel the weariness of some, you know, already taking place, you know. When the rioting ceased, you know, the cameras and the media, they were everywhere when that was happening. But the protest for good has not ceased, but that doesn't make money.
Right.
You know, that doesn't bring us a ratings, you know, it's not part of the agenda, you know, so let's move on and see if we can find violence in some other place, no matter what that looks like, and no matter what color of people are doing the violence, you know, that's what gets someone to stop for a moment and look, tragedy, we're moving at tragedy, you know, or drama, or whatever those things, something in our sin nature drives us to that, and so then it moves and it shifts, and so to say overall, has things changed or is it different? I want you to hear the words of someone else that I think can answer that question, and I think that would better enlighten us as to why do black people, you know, say, but it's only a dream.
Yeah.
Give me a moment to play this and stuff.
Yeah, turn that thing up and put it.
Dr. Martin Luther King, they are. I slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100
just say real quick, if nobody's actually listened to that whole speech in its entirety, do it. It's super powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, and that's 1963, and only with a few minor edits that speech can be spoken today. So that's the reason we say, but it's just
these dang ads.
I know. No, it's all good. Like, yeah, I mean, I love listening to Martin Luther King Jr. and just going back in, you know, like he's known for like the dream speech, you know, that a lot of people know, but he's also known for a lot of other speeches too. And
he's
just to
preacher.
go back and
he's a preacher.
And it's, you know, at least for me, like as I was listening to that, you know, and I'm thinking, okay, this is 63, and he's sharing this dream, you know, and I shared this, I think, earlier, like in one of our previous ones where, you know, we had some good friends of ours that they were black family and they were, you know, raised with our kids, and then they moved to Texas, you know, and I remember, I can honestly remember, like, seeing Natalie, like, she was best friends, you know, like, with this little girl and playing together in our front yard, and they're just all, like, running around, and all of our kids are, like, running around with each other, and literally, like, that dream, that speech, that line where he's like, I have a dream that, like, the little white girls and the little black girls will be holding hands and, like, running, and I was like, it's happening, like, it's taking place, like, this actually did happen, like, his dream isn't dead, you know, like, a lot of people will say, like, well, it was just a dream, and I'm like, no, it wasn't, like, it was in that moment where I was like, no, it didn't, like, it didn't die, like, it started in 63, and yes, we have a long ways to go, but I'm like, it's taking place, like, it is happening, you know, and, yes, and I just remember being filled with, you know, honestly, like, there was just so much joy, like, in my heart, where I was like, Natalie doesn't know, like, she's not old enough to know that speech. She's not old enough to know about, you know, the racism and the hate and all these other things. To her, it was just another girl, another friend of hers that, like, was her best friend. She didn't care if she was black or not, you know, and I just remember, like, sitting there, you know, and like I said, I mentioned Raj across the street, like, our neighbor, his daughter Shreya is, like, Natalie's age, and they, like, one of the cutest moments happened where Natalie, like, was drawing a picture one day, and she's like, Mommy, I can't find a pencil that's Shreya's skin color, you know, and she's like, well, you can just use, you know, like, any color, you know, like, it doesn't matter, and she's like, no, it does, though, like, that's her heritage, and that's her culture, and I want it to be the exact color that she is, and I was like, man, she pays attention to, like, the details, but also, like, she doesn't care, you know, about the skin color, but she also respects it, and she's like, no, that's who she is, you know, like, she's from India, and so this is her culture, and I want to represent it well, you know, like, if I'm drawing a picture of her or whatever, and I was like, man, she's 8 years old, and she gets that, and, you know, it's another, like, proud moment of, like, a daddy of just being like, man, I can't attribute that to, like, yes, I can sit here and say, like, you know, we try to raise our kids and respect all and whatever, but, you know, I know that goes beyond us. It goes other people in the schools and things like that are teaching them these things. But, you know, for me, it's like, okay, we have made progress, you know, but then there's that gap. Like, there's that something that takes place. And I think as we, you know, go and we kind of draw the end of this, like, podcast, and, you know, with this dream, and, like, how, like, this dream of ours and that we've been discussing, how is this dream going to be different? You know, like, I think I briefly shared just kind of like that story about my daughter and stuff, but, like, you know, like you said, you know, how is this dream going to be different that we have and that we're trying to promote this change, you know, and maybe not so much different. I don't want to say, like, how is this different than MLK? You know, like, it's not that at all. Like, it's just, but how do we make sure that we don't go another 60 years, 80 years, 100 years, and have nothing change?
I think part of it is even with that speech, realizing it just because you see the realization of the part where he said the whites and blacks are playing together, the whole rest of that speech still fits this time where we're still dreaming for that.
Yeah.
You know, all these years later, we're still waiting for that. You know, and even there's a piece when you go into the big one where he's talking about, you know, the police, et cetera, et cetera. So those reforms that we're praying, you know, that they are taking place, but don't get stuck on the place that is just the police. It is not. It is bigger than that.
Yeah.
You know, it is beyond, you know, the police. It goes all the way up to the beginning, into politics and you know, politicians and, you know, and all of those, the schoolrooms, you know, the prison system. It's broader than just you know, that little bit. And when we zoom out and only see the pockets that make us feel good, no, come on now. You know, we gotta look at the whole big picture. Don't just zoom in on that thing that make you, you know, feel good and say we've come this far. You know, yes, we've come a long way and things look different, but then when you listen to that speech, is there a moment where you can say, do they really? You know, do they really, you know, look different? So I would say, how do we not? First, we can't keep looking, you know, the other way. Right. And pretending that we don't see what the 400 years of violence has done to a people. Yeah. The whole people group. We can't get sick of hearing the cries and the pleas for help until we no longer see those or hear or feel, you know, what they make us feel that's unpleasant. Neither can we stick our head in the sand, you know, and hope that the dirt will sink so far into our ears that we don't hear, or we can go into our homes, our smart homes or whatnot, and, you know, tell Alexis to close the blinds or whatever, so we don't have to see, or change the channel so that we don't have to know. You know, I would rather be comfortable in my ignorance than to dare risk feeling some emotion or some empathy for a people group, you know, that I have been taught are not really a people group, you know. So we have to get to that point if we want to see the change. And this why we're still dealing with the racism and the hatred and the, you know, in America today, because we have not been willing to see long enough or open our eyes long enough. And so something about George Floyd, you know, forced eyes to open. You know, it forced, but if it had not been caught on camera, along with many other things that, you know, maybe white America didn't know that was taking, you know, place. Seeing on the news now, you're just starting to mention different things, or you're seeing things with a noose here or a noose there, or, you know, at the Oriental Trading and other places that are going on. But hey, you know, we're still saying, wait a minute, that's not new. It never stopped. You know, that has continued. It was just maybe happening without the video cameras, but think about when we didn't have cell phones.
That's exactly right.
Think about when you didn't have someone that you could risk them coming up to see. You know, you took them out in the backwoods, and that's what happened. What do you think happens with a lot of the, you know, missing children, you know, that are out there? You know, so it has not ceased to exist, and if we don't recognize that it's still going on, yes, history is likely to repeat itself, as we're seeing right now today, the things of history repeating itself. Why? Because the enemy would have us to remain ignorant about it. Thus the reason, let's not put this history in the textbooks. You know, we think it is just hate, or we don't need to go talk about that, but how are you going to fix something if you don't even know what's broken on it? When you call someone in to make repairs on your home or whatever, you have them come in and they give you estimates and they do an assessment and they got to figure out what is there. And now that you know what the root cause of what's causing it, now you can fix that thing. But you can't fix something that you don't even understand or know about. You can't fix something that you don't have the empathy about for that person, or you don't have that longevity, that willing to go the distance of what it's going to take. And it goes back to counting up the cost. And so, yes, you know, we may say, I hope so, we don't want to go back this way. But what about, you know, maybe some are concerned, what will happen when the protesting cease? You know, what happens when maybe you don't realize that some of the discussion is happening amongst some corporations, you know, or some conversations, but what happens when you can't see? Will we go back to say, oh, things must be back to normal, you know, so let's just go on with life and leave the people to suffer again, and continue to suffer? Or will we all, after this, step out and say, you know, that what Jesus said, when he said, all sheep I have, you know, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring. You know, if we are Christians, then even we as a people are being judged, I believe, by God for our lack of whatever it is. Is that to say that, you know, churches are not doing anything? Yes, churches are doing things, but I'm talking about now the big scheme of things, you know, to join on board where all are coming out and pulling their head out of the sand, or coming out of their houses and coming in our hedges and byways like we've seen in this protest. They're coming out. So we're excited about that because it's the first time that that has happened in our history that we have seen. You know, this is happening. But it's still that sitting on the edge, having a dream. Okay, when they go inside, will they get comfortable and put the TV back on and just prop up on the pillow and say, you know, well, I got it nice in my house, so I'm good.
Right. Yeah, and I think, you know, you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but like when I saw the streets fill up with riots and people destroying things in the cities and all over the country, you know, my first thought is like, this isn't the answer. Like, and especially, you know, as it was taking place in our city, you know, it's like, I mean, we just went through COVID where a lot of these places were shut down for like 2-3 months, you know, and then these people come in and riot and they throw bricks through windows and they do all these things and destroy these businesses that they were literally getting ready to open like in the next few days, you know, and now they're picking up glass and they're removing spray paint and they're doing all this other stuff. So I know that this wasn't the thing to unify the people, right? Like this, but help us understand, like, and you've kind of touched on this, but the rioting and the stuff that's going on, like that was going on, and still is going on. You know, I know you want to speak into this a little bit, but help us understand a little bit about the riots and your thoughts and what was going through your mind as you're kind of watching this, you know, because I think for us, like it was real, because it's like, man, they're evacuating us out of our building, you know, like here, and we're out in West Omaha, and they're like, what's going on? Like, well, they could come out this way, and I'm like, okay, like this is getting a little bit ridiculous. But what are your thoughts on that? Like,
well, first of all, I would say that we have to know that they are, even though media will make sure they focus in on that, are not always the blacks, you know, that are rioting. This is a tactic that has been used for centuries, where when the fear comes or you feel threatened, then you went into the communities, you know, it's a distraction, so you go into the communities and you set them on fire, or you do whatever. That was used as fear tactics or scare tactics to keep us in place.
We talked about the patsies before off air.
And so then you look at it and then you wonder, if I can go here for a moment, you know, thinking about parents and children, and not saying whites are parents and blacks are children, but we learn, you know, from, you know, the things that we see. But it's also the thing that goes and get the attention, you know. So for those, not that I condone, you know, the breaking in and the looting and the robbing and the stealing or whatever, because yes, it was distracting from the real protesters there. But it goes back to what we say, that there's evil in this world, there's wickedness in this world, there's an enemy in this world, and he's going to always look to kill, steal, and destroy. And if he's been using those things for years to distract it from what's really needed, and that's the reform, and that's the coming together and unifying, and that is the justice that we've been seeking, and the equality that we've been seeking, then yes, I'm not ignorant of Satan's devices and what he would do to try to distract. You know, so you come alongside, and that pattern starts where maybe you have in a city, well, let's bring in a few whites into the black neighborhood, bust up some things, and it's going to do one or two things. It's either going to, then you were very fearful because lynching was open, and it was very real, and so it was a scare tactic to say, basically get in your place, you know, or, you know, if that's not the strategy that we can use in today, then let's do it. We know the media possibly is going to focus in on that, and they're going to catch the, you know, African Americans or blacks doing this thing and magnify that, and we're going to ignore that, hey, maybe in this town right here, it was instigated. It started out with someone driving by in a truck to
dropping off a pile
dropping
of bricks.
yes,
Like,
you know, or throwing the bricks themselves,
Yeah.
you know, and then getting out of town, and then those who have bad behavior say, oh, well, this is what we're doing, and fall in the pattern. And so I would say with the writing, where no, we don't. It breaks my heart as well, and to know that, but I cannot sit here and tell you I don't get it. I don't understand, because take, for example, you've all worked on projects or done something where you felt a level of frustration, forget color and all that right now, where you felt a sense of frustration, where someone may have been trying to sabotage you, or you did the work, or they're taking the credit for it, or whatever, and you have, you know, weeks of that on your job. Well, maybe you can quit your job and go to another job, or you can go to another location. But take a people who have experienced that for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and you know, that anger, and you have a hope, and then it's dashed, and you have another hope, and you're seeing all your people that look like you being killed and murdered, or looked over, or walked on, or whatever. It eventually, that anger, it's like when you get upset with your wife and you get into an argument, or having one of those holy disagreements. Someone picks up a cup
intense
in a
moments
plate.
of fellowship.
Intense moments of fellowship. And you or her pick up a plate and, you know, and break it. Well, you're not going to swing down, throw down a hope on one another, but let's now say that abused woman or man that's taken it and taken it and taken it and taken it for years, and they strike out and unintentionally murder someone or whatever, and then you say that was a passion or a rage or whatever. So yes, you're going to have with all that anger that we as a people have experienced, and you hear, you know, of the black man's anger, the black man's rage. Well, it's no different if now you take for a moment, get in their shoes, and let it be your children, you know, let it be your dad or your mother, you know, your family members that have struggled through this for hundreds and hundreds of years, and now your anger, you know, that you would feel. And if you can just get out, like what I talked about with To Kill a Mockingbird, if you can just get in the shoes for a moment, it doesn't mean it's okay. It doesn't mean it's right, but maybe for a moment you can say, I understand why Mayella did that. I understand, you know, not good, not okay, but I get what made her a product of this behavior. And now with that understanding and that compassion, you can step back into, you know, prayerfully your Christian needs and prayer, and say, so God, what can I do? What can I do to be a help and turn it around? How can I understand it, you know? And so again, you know, it is frustrating when you see that, hey, you know, momentum is going, you see the protesters out there, and we've asked, where are the cameras now? Where are the good that is happening? Where is that unity that you can see taking place? They're still out there. They're coming together. They're doing many things. And I'm not just talking about the few moments you catch on camera where the police bend their knee and they need, you know, get down on their knees with the protesters. That is good. But there is still more that is going out there that is good. Can we step back and see, you know, the beauty?
They're not shining a light on that.
Yes, it's not shining a light, because that's not, go back to what I was saying, it's not making the money or whatever, but that behavior, not saying it's intentional, it's just something that you do because, you know, we've been doing it this way for so long, and that's what we're saying. You can't continue to do business as usual. You can't continue to do the same thing and expect a different outcome. Somewhere along the line, we have to stop and look at and examine what have we been doing, you know, and then what do we do differently if we want a different outcome? And that includes politics and media.
So I got a question for you. So this is something I think, I certainly think about it myself, and if other people are in the same mindset of me, then they probably think about it too. And I want to ask this question because I am curious, at least for my own knowledge and curiosity, and then if there's other people who feel the same way, hopefully this will help them a little bit. As you were speaking there, and I was thinking about, hey, in closing out, you know, I should just say a piece about, hey, you know, if you know someone, or you know, maybe you're connected with someone who is of a different race, and certainly someone who is Black, given everything that's going on, you know, reach out to them, see how they're doing, try to grab coffee, connect with those people. As you were talking, I was trying to think about that, like, people, we all should be trying to right now maximize our love for each other, and grow and know each other, and get to know other people's hearts, and get to know their background and their story. But for me, I think a struggle that I have is thinking about doing it in a way where it doesn't seem like, hey, they're just reaching out to me because of everything that's going on right now. How can people do it in a way that's genuine? And it needs to be genuine, of course, right? People shouldn't be forcing themselves to try to have relationships. The whole point is that we need to come together as a people, regardless of race, creed, color, whatever, and love each other. But how do they do that in a way where it can be received as being more genuine and something that they want to do? Yes, maybe a catalyst is all the stuff that's going on right now, but it doesn't, I guess I'm not wording this correctly, but how do you make it to where it doesn't seem like, oh, hey, they're just reaching out to me because of all this stuff that's going on? You know what I mean?
And that, again, is going to be as diverse as the number of people that you could go to try to do that, because of their own background, their experiences, their lack of trust, or you know, do you really mean it, you know, or whatnot. You're going to have a group of people that are excited and saying, yes, I see it, you know, that there is a difference and there is a change, and I believe it, and they will be with, oh, thank you for going out to have a coffee, you know. And then you also have to be okay with those who say, yes, I go for a coffee, and then be ready for, but where you been all these years? You have to be comfortable with that. If you want to go into it and just say, oh, okay, I don't want to have any, you know, anything said to me that's going to make me uncomfortable, or make me feel guilty, or make me feel whatever, then I will question your genuineness. If we can't be willing to know that, and this goes from, again, getting in their shoes, knowing where they're coming from, and now having to be sensitive to what they've gone through. It's kind of like my daughter works with, you know, the foster care, you know, system and thing like that. And when you know what those children's background have been, then you're more tolerant and accepting of if they lash out or if they respond in a certain way. And then you have to be prepared for that answer and be comfortable with allowing them to vent and say, or whatever. Maybe they'll call your name and say, the only reason you're doing this is because of this. Then just say, you know, sadly it is, you know, but I'm trying to do something. You have to be ready versus going into the defense and saying, see, that's why I don't want to, you know, we shouldn't do anything for these people or whatever because they're ungrateful or whatever. No, you're dealing with a person that's in pain. You're dealing with a person that's been experiencing this hurt, and you know, now you have someone that may just now have realized it just a few weeks ago or a few months ago, wanting to give you coffee, and you haven't released that anger or frustration, and you may just happen to be the right person they can unleash it on for the very first time. Not talking about the violence thing, but just the words. So you have to be comfortable with that expression of frustration and anger, and know how to say, you know, you're right. You know, it is, and it's a sad commentary that I'm just now coming. Right. But can I take you for a cup of coffee?
Yeah.
And be willing with the no, or get away from you, or whatever, and walk away, and not now classify a whole people group again based on that one incident you had with one black person that was upset and angry.
Yeah. Well, and I think that right there is the perfect answer in closing, as far as, you know, like, how can this dream of ours be different? Like, that's literally the answer. Like, I think that's how it can be different. Like, as we've been talking through this series so far, it's like, we got to get to know one another, then we got to know some history, and now it's taking action, right? And so we've got all that stuff. Like, we can go back 60 years and we can learn about the history, but now it's like, what are we going to do differently? And are we going to literally take the time to have that cup of coffee, right? Like, I know there's some things that, like, are difficult to bring up, or like, we've asked some difficult questions throughout this series, but, like, what has it done? It's brought us closer together, you know, and it's helped us better understand one another and your history and your culture and your family background. Like, but that didn't just happen because we were like, all right, let's do a podcast.
Exactly.
Like there was a lot of planning that went into this, and there was a lot of dialogue and discussion. And I think that's what people have to understand is like, this isn't going to be something that like, don't make it something to do off your checklist.
That's it.
Right? Like, don't make this be something where it's like, all right, well, I got a cup of coffee and now I knew a little bit about that person and great. Like, now I can move on. Like, that's not going to help the situation. That's not, you will be living in the dream then. Like, it's going to be putting forth that effort on a continuous, like, consistency, right? We talk about this all the time in our business. Like, consistency, right? Like, you can tell who the average agent is, and then who the really top-notch agent is because they're consistent in things. They're consistent in follow-up. They're consistent in reaching out to people in their pipeline. They're consistent. Like, it's the same thing with this whole thing, I think, in conclusion, is like, continue to have a consistent conversation.
Yes.
Like, don't let this be something that just takes place now because we're in it. But like we said, and when we first started this, like, we're going to make this something that we continue to do on a quarterly basis to continue that conversation, because there's going to be more stuff that comes up, right?
Yeah.
But then I think there's obviously a lot of other questions that as we sit here and talk, we're like, well, that could be a whole nother podcast, right? You know? And so with that being said, I know we've gone a little bit longer than usual, but I think this has been a really good series with you, you know, dialoguing and talking about some of these things. But that's really the answer, I think, at the end of the day is, again, we've been saying from the beginning, listen to the person, right? Learn from the person, grow with that person, you know, and then obviously love that person. Like, and so as you continue to, you can't continue to love someone if you're not willing to put forth the action behind it, right? So, like, I'm not going to feel loved by my wife if, like, all I get is a, hey, honey, like, when she gets home, and, like, and then, okay, here's a whole bunch of stuff to do, and blah, blah, and then it's like, we don't converse or communicate for the next, like, 3 months, like, probably not going to feel a lot of love and a connection there to my wife, right? Same thing goes for, like, us and our relationships with our friends and our family members. Like, it's got to be an ongoing thing in building that relationship, and that's why I think we always talk about, like, relationships are so important to us in our business and in our lives, because I'm not the type of guy that's like wanting the fake supernatural, like, this thing that's not real kind of relationship or friendship with someone. Like, I like to go deep. I like to have those conversations. Like, I want to get to know you, because it's like, it just gets, after a while, you can tell, like, we all hate the car salesman, right? Because, like, you can tell it's fake. Like, you get in there and, hey, what can I help you with today? And let's get you to this one. And you're just like, dude, that's not even what I told you that I was, like, interested in looking at, you know? But, oh, but just check it out, though. What about this new one? That's out of my price range. Oh, it's okay. Like, you're just, and it turns you off, because you're like, I have no desire to, like, work with you or get to know this guy. But if it's real, genuine, and authentic, which I think, you know, us reaching out and grabbing coffee and sitting down and doing whatever, like, that's one step forward, you know, and taking the action now. And if that's you guys and you're out there wondering, like, what can I do? Like, that's one thing that you can do, you know, is to literally just sit down and get to know someone. And, you know, it makes me feel convicted, honestly, when I think about all the times where you sit down with your friends and you have a barbecue and you do whatever, and it's like, what are you always talking about? Like, hey, how's the real estate market? Hey, how's this? How's your business? How's your family? But it doesn't go, like, deep. It doesn't go beyond that sometimes. And it's like, man, I feel like I have a lot of friends, but I don't feel like I really know them. You know what I mean? Like, and that stinks to say out loud, but I think if you look at that, like, a lot of times I'm like, how many, like, true, authentic relationships do I have in my life? Where, like, if somebody asked them some history about my life, that they would know it, you know, or vice versa. Like, so yeah, I mean, I know we've gone way over, but hopefully that wraps up a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, and things like that. But if you guys have any questions, comments, suggestions, you know, like I said, we want this to be ongoing. So for those of you that are listening, that have been listening, if there's topics or certain things that you want us to address moving forward, let us know, because we would love to tap into those and get your questions answered, get your suggestions or comments or whatever. You know, we keep it real, so we just love just getting together and dialoguing. So with that,
thanks so much,
anything else you guys want to add?
Justine, anything to add?
No, just I want to say thank you again for bringing me here to talk about this topic at such time as this. It's challenging, but I thank you for being willing to have the dialogue and to use your platform for something like this, and that you would continue to see how God would lead you in the way that you would go. And I guess for just those that are still out there, going back to whether or not, the dream, because we was talking about Martin Luther King Jr. today, and the dream and the hope. And I would just like to read this last piece and just say, nevertheless, you talk about all these things that happened. I just thought, nevertheless, today, many of us are looking in the face of hope for the very first time since our ancestors was brought over on a slave ship to be sold, abused, raped, tortured, lynched, and stripped of our parents, husbands, wives, children, our language, culture, and ultimately our identity in the name of economic growth. And so even though all of that has taken place in our history, this time something about this has given a renewed sense of hope, and we pray that you don't grow weary in well doing while this dream comes to realization.
Amen to that.
Good stuff.
Love it. Good stuff, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will talk to you guys soon.
Later, gators.